All right, so you want to unlock some serious Stoic wisdom. Well, today we're going straight to the source, Epictetus, expert speaker. And specifically, his discourses. We're going to be focusing on books 1 and 2.
Okay.
It's like, imagine you're sitting right there with Epictetus, getting a personal philosophy lesson,
Yeah.
but, without the togas in ancient Greek.
Well, and what makes Epictetus so fantastic is that he's so relatable even today, right? He just cuts straight to the chase, to that feeling we all get sometimes, like we're being tossed around by life, all those ups and downs.
And it's not just about, oh, woe is me, right? He gives us tools to actually deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the first things he introduces is this idea of the dichotomy of control,
Okay.
which sounds kind of complicated,
Yeah.
but it's actually pretty simple.
So break it down for me. What is this dichotomy? What's it all about?
Basically, it's like this. There are things that are within our control, like our thoughts, our judgments, and our actions,
Hmm?
right? But then there are all these things that are outside of our control, like our body, our possessions, what other people think of us, our reputation, external events.
So, like, I can control how I react to a traffic jam, but I can't control the traffic itself.
Exactly.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This super simple idea, it's like the bedrock of Stoic tranquility.
Hmm.
Like if you can really understand this and start focusing on what you can control, you'll find that you worry a lot less, you're less anxious, you're less overwhelmed by all that external stuff that you just can't do anything about.
Right. So it's not about becoming some like emotionless robot or anything like that. It's about
Correct.
focusing your energy like where it actually matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses a really powerful analogy, the archer.
Okay.
Right? Think about an archer. They can control how skillfully they aim the arrow, how they release it, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But can they control if the wind suddenly changes direction
No,
or if the target moves? No.
Yeah.
So that's a really good example of how some things are just out of our hands.
Okay, but how does that apply to, like, my current work project that I'm totally stressing over?
Yeah,
I mean, I can control the effort I put in, but I can't control if my boss ends up liking it in the end.
exactly. And that's where this idea of acceptance comes in. Just knowing that some things are just beyond your control, it helps you to just let go of that anxiety.
Hmm.
You can focus your energy on the stuff that you can influence, like your effort, your dedication, how you approach the project. And that, according to Epictetus, is what leads to greater inner peace.
That's really helpful to think about it like that.
yeah.
So instead of, like, stressing out about things I can't control, I should just do my best and be okay with whatever the outcome is.
Absolutely.
Right.
And this kind of ties into another major principle that he talks about all the time, living in accordance with nature.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that phrase before, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
Yeah.
Does that mean, like, going off the grid, living in a cabin in the woods?
It's not so literal like that.
Okay.
It's not about like becoming a hermit.
Right.
It's more about understanding that there's like a natural order to the universe, even if we don't always see it or understand it.
Right.
And the more we try to fight against that order, the more we suffer.
So are you saying that if I'm facing a difficult situation, like a serious illness, that I should just, like, passively accept it?
Not exactly. It's
Okay.
not about passive resignation.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that some things, like illness, are part of nature, part of life,
Yeah.
and we just don't have control over everything that happens.
Okay.
But what we do have control over is how we respond to those events.
All right. That makes sense. But how does, like, living in accordance with nature, how does that connect to the dichotomy of control we were talking about?
Well, think about it like this. If you're constantly battling against stuff you can't change, you're creating unnecessary suffering for yourself.
Hmm.
You're basically working against the grain of the universe, so to speak.
Yeah, I can see that.
But if you can accept the things you can't control, and you focus your energy on what you can control, your thoughts, your actions, your judgment, then you'll find that you're more in harmony with that natural order.
Okay. Yeah, I'm starting to see the connection.
Yeah.
It's about, like, recognizing the limits of our control and working within those limits. It's about working with the universe, not against it.
Exactly. And this actually leads us to Epictetus's ideas about appearances, which is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into that.
All right. So appearances.
When you said appearances, I'm thinking like fashion choices, not philosophy.
Thankfully, Epictetus is not giving us fashion advice.
Okay, good.
What he means by appearances is how things seem to us, like those first impressions,
Right.
which often can be very different from reality.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this ties into judgments. We often judge, like, right away based on just surface stuff without really thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And those judgments, that's where a lot of our suffering comes from, according to Epictetus.
Mm.
Like you see someone with a fancy car, big house, you know all the outward signs of success,
Yeah.
and you think, oh, wow, they must have it all figured out.
Right, totally.
But you don't see maybe the stress they're under, the debt they might have, maybe the problems in their relationships.
True, yeah. It's so easy to just compare ourselves to others, just based on that surface stuff.
And that's what Epictetus is warning us against.
Okay.
He says we got to train ourselves to see things more objectively.
Right.
Like peel back those layers of judgment and ask ourselves, is this really how it is?
So it's like those optical illusions where you think you're seeing one thing, but then it turns out to be something else entirely.
Exactly. And the more we can see those mental illusions, the less control they have over us.
Okay, this is making sense, but how do we actually do this?
Right.
It's one thing to understand the idea, but how do we train ourselves to see through those false appearances when we're, in the middle of it all?
That's where the real work of Stoicism begins. It's a constant practice of questioning our assumptions,
Right.
examining our judgments, and remembering that things aren't always what they seem.
So it's like building up a mental muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And the stronger that muscle gets, the less we're going to be swayed by all those superficial appearances that cause us so much stress.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. What about dealing with difficult emotions like anger, grief, fear, all the fun stuff?
Yeah.
That's something I think we all struggle with. So any practical tips from Epictetus on that?
He does. He actually offers this technique called precognitions.
Precognitions.
Sounds kind of fancy.
Yeah, like, do I need a crystal ball for this?
No crystal ball required. It's basically about preparing yourself mentally for difficult situations before they happen.
Oh, okay. So like having a script ready to go when things get tough?
So instead of being caught off guard and reacting impulsively, you've already thought about how a Stoic would respond.
Right.
You can tap into that wisdom in the heat of the moment.
I like that. Like a cheat sheet for life's tough moments. But how do I know what kind of precognitions I should prepare for?
He says, think about the situations that usually trigger those strong emotions for you, like dealing with difficult people, setbacks, or even just daily annoyances. Once you know your triggers, then you can start to develop those rational, pre-prepared responses.
So like if I know that traffic jams always make me irritable, I could have a precognition ready that reminds me to use that time productively, like listen to a podcast or something.
Perfect example. You're shifting your perspective. You're choosing how you're going to respond instead of letting your emotions run the show.
That is so empowering, like taking back control.
Yeah, that's the kind of mental strength he's talking about. And this leads us to another cool paradox he brings up: confidence and caution.
Confidence and caution, those seem kind of contradictory, don't they?
Right. How can you be both?
Yeah.
Well, he makes a distinction.
Okay.
Confidence, he says, should be applied to things totally outside our control, like death, illness, natural disasters, that kind of stuff.
So I can be confident that the sun will rise tomorrow, but I should be cautious about what I choose to do with that day.
Exactly.
Okay.
We can apply this to all sorts of things, like say you're giving an important presentation.
Oh, yeah, I can relate to that. Public speaking always makes me nervous. Yeah.
You can't control if the audience is going to love it, right? Some people might be bored, some might disagree, and that's okay.
Right.
That's where the confidence comes in, accepting that.
But I can control how well I prepare, right?
Exactly. That's where the caution comes in. Carefully crafting your presentation, practicing, thinking about your audience.
So it's about being cautious in our actions and choices, but confident in accepting the outcomes.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key point: the importance of practice.
Right. He's not just about theory. He wants us to actually live this stuff.
Exactly. It's like learning an instrument. You can read all the books, but you'll never learn to play without actually picking it up and practicing.
So how do we practice Stoicism? What does that look like in everyday life?
It's about being aware of our thoughts, noticing when we're falling into those negative thought patterns,
Right.
and then gently guiding ourselves back to that Stoic perspective.
Okay.
It's about making conscious choices day after day to actually align our actions with what we believe.
So like being aware of those moments when I'm getting caught up in like envy, anger, fear, and then choosing to respond differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's those little choices, those little moments throughout the day that add up.
Right.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
That makes it seem a lot more achievable.
That's the thing about Stoicism. It's meant to be lived, not just studied.
Hmm.
And the more we practice it, the more we actually live it, the better our lives become.
Okay, so we're back. And we're ready to dig a little deeper into how to actually put these Stoic principles into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And one technique that Epictetus talks about is it's called negative visualization.
Negative visualization.
Yeah,
That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right?
I thought we were supposed to be focusing on the positive.
Well, it's not about dwelling on negativity. It's more about preparing ourselves for those inevitable tough times, the setbacks and challenges that we all face in life.
So, like, anticipating those difficult moments so we're not totally thrown off guard when they happen.
Yeah, exactly. Epictetus suggests we take some time each day to actually think about the things we might lose, like our health, our possessions, even our loved ones.
I see why you called it negative visualization. It's not exactly like a cheery exercise.
It might seem a little grim at first,
Yeah.
but the point is that by thinking about these potential losses, we actually appreciate what we have even more. It helps us be more grateful and also detach ourselves from the things that we can't control anyway.
So it's about shifting our perspective, realizing that everything we have is a gift, not something we're entitled to.
Exactly. And it can make us more resilient, too.
Okay.
If we've already considered the possibility of losing something, we're going to be better equipped to handle it if it actually happens.
That makes sense. It's like if you know a storm's coming, you'll be more prepared to weather it.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And this also ties into another core Stoic principle, self-control.
Right. The Stoics were all about mastering our emotions, not letting them control us. But how does that connect to negative visualization?
Well, by doing that, by practicing negative visualization, we're basically training our minds to stay calm and rational, even when things get tough. We're less likely to completely freak out with grief or anger or fear because we've already kind of mentally prepared ourselves for it.
So like building up a mental immunity to those negative emotions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Huh?
And this leads to maybe one of the most challenging but also freeing aspects of Stoicism, letting go of our attachments.
Okay, this is a big one. What does it actually mean to let go of attachments? Does that mean I have to like give away all my stuff and become a monk?
Not necessarily. It's not about rejecting the world or denying ourselves pleasures. It's more about understanding that our happiness shouldn't depend on external things,
Okay.
like possessions, status, relationships, even our own bodies.
So it's more about finding a kind of inner peace that doesn't depend on those external factors. So like if I lose my job or if a relationship ends, my whole world doesn't fall apart.
Exactly. Epictetus reminds us that those things are ultimately out of our control. What we can control is how we respond to them, our attitude, our perspective.
But isn't that easier said than done? It's natural to be upset, to be disappointed when we lose something or someone that matters to us.
Of course, it's natural to grieve, to feel those emotions. Stoicism isn't about pretending we don't have feelings. It's about acknowledging them,
Yeah.
accepting them, and then choosing how we want to move forward.
So it's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing the pain, but not letting it completely consume us.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of living in accordance with nature. When we hold on too tightly to things that are always changing, things we can't control, that's when we set ourselves up for suffering.
It's like trying to hold on to a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips through your fingers.
That's a beautiful image. And the more we can loosen our grip on those attachments, the more peace and freedom we find inside.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the wisdom in all this. It's about shifting our focus, right? From the stuff we can't control to what our thoughts, our actions, our character.
Yeah, that's it. That's the heart of Stoicism. And remember, it's a journey, a lifelong practice. It's about learning and growing.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening look into Epictetus and Stoicism. I feel like I have some new tools to handle those tough times a little better.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember what Epictetus said. The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best.